Reem is here.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Reem.
I mean,
How do you say your last name? Is it Gafar or Jafar?
It's Jafar.
Jafar. Okay, Reem
Yeah.
Jafar.
You guys
Wel-
again.
Welcome, Reem. We're just gossiping about your book, and
Oh, the thunder was about the book?
yeah. So we're talking about science and art.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yes, science and art. Yes. So everybody, welcome Reem. We've had Reem here before. I think 2 years ago when we had six authors from five
Yeah,
countries and the collection relations. So
really.
all the authors there, they didn't really get to speak much because we just had 2 hours to squeeze in everything. So today we have Reem here. So let me quickly read her bio. So Reem Jaffer is a writer, physician, researcher, and filmmaker. Her writing has appeared in African Arguments, African Feminism, Tikisi magazine, and Daria and 500 Words magazine, among others. Her short story, Light of the Desert, was published in I Know Two Sudans by Griffins Press, where it was awarded an honorable mention. Her short story, Finding Descartes, was published in Relations, an anthology of African and diaspora voices by HarperCollins. A Mouthful of Salt, Saki Books Invisible Publishing is her debut novel and winner of the Island Prize 2023. She is currently pursuing a PhD in Public Health Sciences at the University of Ontario Institute of Technology in Ontario, Canada. So, welcome, Reem. I have my notes here on my iPad. So, we are all ready to bombard you with questions. So, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here again. Thank you.
So, I think my first question, I listened to the audio twice, finished it again this morning, tried to read this also. So I think my struggle with it was the way I understand stories is I follow a character. So I follow the arc and the trajectory of that character. And then, but this one, a lot was going on. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, first of all, what was your inspiration for writing this story? Because I don't think I have ever read like a full novel by any author from Sudan. And it's amazing how similar we are in cultures. I mean, the cultures like
Yeah,
North Africa
exactly.
and then West Africa, especially when it comes to women and agency and
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So tell us about your inspiration for writing this book.
yeah. Well, first I understand what you mean about the characters. It's usually one character. That's how I like, reading my novels too.
Okay.
Um, but when I wrote this story, it was always about a boy who dies in the absence of his parents
Mhm.
and what happens in the village around this search for his body.
Okay.
This was actually based on a story that I heard a friend of mine told me that the mother had gone away somewhere and she left her son with her in-laws, with his grandparents, and
Okay.
then he was playing in front of the house and he was hit by a car and he died.
Mm.
Um, and he was only 3 years old, and that had happened recently when she told me the story. It was very upsetting for me, and even though I didn't know them. And when at the funeral, her mother-in-law was crying and asking for the mother's forgiveness. So that kind of just stuck with me for quite a while. Um, this whole story, and that was even before I had kids. So it was always about a child who passes away in the absence of his parents. And at that time, I had this story of a village where a child drowns. Drowning is very common in villages that live alongside the Nile, even if you know how to swim, and most people know how to swim.
Okay.
Very common cause of death. So that was how it started. It was a short story. The child drowns, and then it's like a camera being passed from person to person until it comes full circle back to where they find the child's body again. So that's how it started. And then it started getting a bit longer and longer as I started exploring different themes. Characters started, becoming more and more clear. It was always about Fatima, about this girl who wants to pursue an education and leave the village. But then even just to tell her story and her side of the story, there had to be some other, characters that kind of give a fuller picture. Um, the third character, whose story we hear at the second half of the story, this was a mysterious person who didn't really have their own story. This is also based on a character that I've heard of in real life. But then again, when you talk about this the other in our community, it's very easy to kind of sideline that person, and this is really kind of a basis for where racism comes in. It's the ignorance of this other. Whereas this other is just like us, they have their own story and their own background and their own childhood. And so that kind of took me down that lane
Mhm.
of exploring this person. So that's why there was quite a lot going on there.
Yeah, because sometimes I start off, then I go, oh, what's happening? Then I go back. I guess maybe because I listen to the audio, because most of the time I multitask, but I'm
Okay.
able to follow audiobooks. I love audiobooks. And the reader, the narrator, she did a good job. So it's not like her voice or anything, but I kept getting lost. Okay, who is this person? Which Fatima is this? Who is
Yeah,
this? So I'm still going to open the floor up for people to start asking questions because I know everybody is itching to ask. Bukola is joining us from the UK. Bukola, I'll let you go first.
Hi, Reem. Thank you, Louisa. I actually don't have a question, but I wanted to say I enjoyed this book, and I was saying earlier that it actually reminded me very much of The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. I don't know if you've read that.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, because the themes are similar, and being multi-generational, being about drowning or about just incidents related with water, and then also being about mysteries and people thinking it's a curse, and then finding scientific or real reasons
It,
that
yeah,
demystifies it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's interesting that you bring that up because, and this is again something that we have in common in our different societies, Middle Eastern, African, South Asian, is that it's always easier to kind of drape something in superstition, something that you don't understand or you don't want to understand, to just describe it as supernatural or as a curse or something like that. And that's what in this story, for example, there were several events that were happening, and even this mysterious person, and people would rather talk about them as sorcery or as a witch or something, whereas everything has a perfectly logical explanation, a scientific explanation, and you don't even have to think too hard about it. But that's really what societies prefer to do when they're dealing with something that they don't want to think about.
Exactly. And that's where how we started talking about thunder and things like that, talking
Okay,
about the
yes, that's
mystery.
what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know you said it's very common in Africa, Southern Af Asian cultures, but I think all over, especially when it's to do with women. So a lot of Black history, when you're reading about Black American history, women that were called witches, and just like it was in Africa, a lot of women that were called witches is because they stood for something that society didn't want them to stand for. Then automatically they became witches. So it's just that thing that we don't understand, as you say, and then people just to make people run away from it and to protect the stories that have been told, really, or to protect patriarchy. So thank you very much. I enjoyed your book. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I just want to ask, what was the significance of the Nile? I don't know because as I was reading the story, the Nile just kept coming back to me. The Nile, the Nile, the Nile, the Nile, the Nile.
Yeah.
Telling the story. What was the significance of the Nile?
The Nile as a river, I haven't seen other rivers that quite look like the Nile. It's this very, very, I mean, obviously, it's very long and it spans several, countries. It's a bit unique in that it flows in different directions at the same time. So it goes, instead of going from north to south, it goes south to north. And then at one point, there's a bend where it actually changes direction, then it goes back up again.
Okay.
Um, and it's always had a significance in the cultures of all the countries or all the civilizations that have lived alongside it, starting from Ethiopia all the way up to Egypt, and that has always been part of even our old Nubian pharaohic civilizations. So because it's so significant in what it gives people, in that it basically gives them life, in that it waters the ground. We use it for transport.
Mhm.
As part of protection, a natural sort force of protection against invading armies. For example, all these forces that tried to occupy, and they did eventually occupy Sudan. This was actually a protective part of. I mean, it was until people invented something strong enough to cross it. So it's always a part of that, and also in our daily life, because it's kind of everywhere, like even in the middle of Khartoum, you can't get from one place to another without crossing it at some point. So lots of bridges. I used to cross it every day when I used to go to medical school, because I lived on one side and my university was on the other side. And so it's something that you see every day. But at the same time, it is so incredibly, it takes whenever it wants. It's very, very erratic, very unpredictable. You cannot tame it at all. You have like one rainfall and it suddenly expands in size and and it just sweeps everything away. It's so unpredictable. It's not something that you can claim is like, a nice river that people live alongside. It's never that way. It is very, it can be quite catastrophic. And especially in these rivers that live alongside the Nile, you can't really separate your livelihood from it because especially that's where all the farming and the gardens are by, is people have to cross it also in a more primitive way in these villages. And drowning is very, very common. I personally have several extended families. My brother-in-law, which is actually the person who this book was dedicated to, alongside my family, he drowned in the Nile, and he was an expert swimmer forever and ever, and he was quite young. I mean, in his early 20s, and no one can understand it really. And even now, this isn't something that used to happen, but isn't happening. It's happening right now in this day and age of people drowning all the time. It's such a presence which does not go away, and it's just one of those things where it exists alongside the people, and then when it decides to, it just leans over and bites someone. So
Mm.
it's quite a presence, yeah.
All right, thank you. Tosin, I see your hand up. After Tosin is Lydie.
Thank you, Louisa. Thank you for joining us, Reem, and I'm sorry for your loss. Um, so my question is about Fatima, and there wasn't like it didn't her storyline didn't quite resolve in the book. I was very curious to know what she ended up deciding because she grew up in a village, deeply patriarchal village by virtue of both culture, religion, um, isolation. This is culture, sorry, tradition of, this is just the way things always are. And a lot of the women, most of the women, they're just tacitly resigned to their fate, so to speak. And you can see almost kind of like the pecking order of how, for their own survival, they end up kind of playing into or almost buying into this patriarchal system. But Fatima seemed like one individual who was a little bit different, and had ambitions, and even though I'm not sure if it was actually clearly explicitly mentioned in the book, she had the support of her father, if she decided to do something different, from marrying her cousin or going off to university and pursuing her education and her own kind of trajectory in life. So even though it wasn't really said in the book, I am curious to know how Fatima ended up, and what she chose in the end, if that's something that could be articulated, or I don't know, you could also just leave it up to us to interpret as well.
Well, actually, I'm curious what you guys thought happened, or what would you think would happen?
My hope for her is that she broke the mold, broke the cycle, and did marry Sadiq, and moved on, and expanded her world and her horizons. That's my hope for Fatima, but yeah.
But I think for Fatima was because I think I kept mixing them up. Fatima was the woman, lady towards the end who was having that conversation with that guy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I felt
Her
that
betrothed.
Sadiq was different.
Hmm.
At a point when he moved and she thought he was going to hit her,
Yeah,
and he asked, I mean, do you think I was going to hit you?
yeah.
That was the
Was a
first.
benevolent patriarch.
Yeah, that was the first part I think I saw a man actually having a conversation with her on the same level as equals, right? And anyway, in my hopeless romantic mind, I went, oh, and they move on into the sunset.
Yeah.
So that's me. I mean, that's me thinking,
Yeah.
yeah, that's me thinking, okay, this might be, he might let her go to school, but first of all, having that conversation and that question he asked her, do you think I was going to hit you? And then there was also a question he asked her, but seeking her opinion mattered. Because I remember some parts where one of the women, I can't remember which of the women, where they were talking about a wife and saying that's not the decision for the man to make. His family makes that, about the picking a wife for him, down to from the way she looks, her complexion, and even the way she walks.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, wow, wow.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, first, in terms of what she decides to do, this was a part where I had to kind of step back because my own biases were stepping in here, and that I wanted her to to leave and go and pursue an education. And actually, Fatima is based on a real character as well. Someone who also the very first way back in the what was the 30s or 40s, the first female physician in Sudan was also someone who had to fight her family, and her father supported her. So she was kind of inspired by that. And that person went on to be very successful and also went into politics and everything. So that's kind of the idea that I had for Fatima. But at the same time, because in different societies, but especially in the Sudanese societies, you have so many barriers to get over. It's not just your immediate family. You even if your father is supportive, for example, and your parents, then you have your extended family, your uncles and your aunts, and then you have the community or the neighborhood, and then there's just so much to go through. So I was just thinking realistically, even if her father is supportive, will he be able to go against his family and let her, pursue an education and leave their very conservative village to go to Khartoum, where women walk around without covering their hair and all that nonsense that people think. It was, I'd like to think that she did, and then even if she did make it to university to Khartoum, would it be everything that she imagined? Because one of the scenarios that I had in my head was that she gets there, she gets to Khartoum, and then she's like, "What is this? I mean, this was what I was, trying to do all this time." Or she gets through her, education, and then she comes face to face with life. Because again, the time period that she's in, which is in the late 80s, this is right before the Islamist military overthrew the government in 1989. And after 1989, everything just fell to pieces in Sudan. It was a horrible time to be alive, with all the oppression and the death and the disappearances and everything. And so that's the time period where she would be coming into the world and thinking that she was having her dreams come true, and then she'd come face to face with all of this. And so these were kind of different scenarios going on, and so I kind of left it open there, to see how everyone interprets it. And it's interesting to see that almost most people kind of go with the idea or with the hope that she did, she made it. And I like to think that too. But even if she did make it, because I mean, we're being realistic here. Even if you do make it here, what comes next? The next step is always much more difficult. So there's never really a happy ending. And that's why none of my stories have happy endings, just because it's not pessimistic, but it's kind of realistic in that that's how real life kind of works. In terms of the possible romance with Sadiq, that's also something that I was kind of quite subtle. Not because I wanted to leave it open, but because I don't really do romance. I don't do love stories because again, part of real life, and they just kind of um, it's also something that changes with a person's age and experience. Something especially at her age, where you're 16 and everything is so romantic and lovely, but then the older you grow, the more exposed you are to life and to other people, you find that that wasn't really something at all. When you think about your older boyfriends and then where you ended up in life, you find that you've matured so much. But also that people have opinions of each other. So Fatma always thought that this guy was a total idiot. Um, just because he's not like her, he's not someone who is educated or wants to do something according to her idea. She thought that he was just, some other idiot from the village, where actually he's quite mature just because he's been traveling and he's been exposed, and he doesn't mind at all, or I don't think he minds if she would want to pursue an education. And he even one of his earlier thoughts with himself was that, what if she decides to go to Khartoum? Would he mind? He didn't think he would mind. And so actually this was a much better match than she could have imagined in that state of yeah. And just as you mentioned, she immediately thought that he would be someone to hit her, whereas that hadn't even occurred to him. So also this kind of not first impressions, but general impressions of someone, or you think what they're about and you think that you're always right. This was also something that I struggled with Fatima in that, but that's the kind of age for it. When you're that age, you always think you're right. Teenagers think they know everything of the world and that it's only their opinion, where actually it's not always the way.
Okay, thank you. Laide. Laide. Lola, go ahead. I think Laide is working.
Okay. So thank you, Reem, for joining us. Just a few things about what you just said, that there are no happy endings. And, while there may not be happy endings, there can be happy in-betweens, right? And so I think a lot of times, yes, we underestimate what happy is, right? Or in the pursuit of happy, we lose sight of everything else, right? And then in terms of Fatima, I felt like she was the immature one, right? Her age, yes, but also, and like you said, teens feel like they
Own
know
living.
everything. Sadiq was, yes, he may have had his own problems, but because of his travels, he had been stretched. He had experiences from other culture, and so that I think helped him to not be like all the other patriarchs that he was surrounded by. And I appreciated that, right? I don't think that a match between him and Fatima would have worked personally.
Really?
So I wasn't looking for that, because I felt like because of her immaturity, there would just be too much going on. And because of his own experiences of other culture and things, he might not have been able to know quite what to do with her because he wouldn't want to hurt her. So I wasn't really looking for a love match there, but I think, yes, they can be happy in betweens. And, a lot of times we tend to lose sight of that because we're looking for the happy endings, right? So, but thank you for the book. It was eye-opening. I think one of the things that really stood out for me was the idea that, and it continues to surprise me because it still happens, this whole idea of colorism where, they've I mean, when I went to Google the pictures of, Sudanese people, I'm like, they're not that light. So what's the problem here? What's going on? So for me, I'm like, what's really happening here? So that would be yeah, I was curious about that.
Lola,
Yeah.
let me say something before Reem says something.
Yeah.
When you spoke about you Googled Sudanese people, one thing I've realized in the few Sudanese people I've met, they range from the darkest night to the brightest. I have a Sudanese colleague. I didn't know. For me, she was racially ambiguous. She had an American accent.
Yeah.
She had curly hair. I thought she was Mexican. And then I have seen the ones that are really, really like night with shiny black.
Yep.
So it's very, very interesting. It's unlike Nigerians where you say, okay, this one is Igbo, this is Yoruba, this is Hausa, this is Fulani. Now theirs is amazing.
You can't tell, yeah. I mean, you might tell which general area, but and I mean, it's like you mentioned. I mean, we're all black people. This is why I don't. This is why to me, racism between you know people of the same country or even of the same continent is pretty stupid because when people look at us from the outside, you're all black people. Why are you? How do you think you're better than the other black person? And the same honestly is in Sudan, and because lots of countries, particularly in these areas where which were affected by occupation and the different trade movements and all of that, people are very, racially diverse. It's like a literal melting pot. No one can really claim that they're pure or they're an original person and a native and no one else is a native other than them or whatever thing makes people feel superior to others. It's this really old, boring discussion that people just insist on having because they really insist on feeling better than the other person. Unfortunately, it's quite entrenched in Sudan and many other societies. Everyone has it to their own level and to their own, along different ethnic lines. Unfortunately, in Sudan, it goes along. The results are quite catastrophic, as in it, you have wars and you have conflict and displacement and lots of death, and it's all just so unnecessary, I think. I mean, I don't really see the point. I come from several different tribes, most of which are Arabic, but I don't see myself as just purely, because that's not the way it works. This is, you're part of this country, and that's you can be all of these things. You don't have to be only one and not the other. I just wanted to say that I really like that idea of happy in betweens. That's a very interesting way of looking at things, and it's actually quite nice. Um, and one thing that does come to mind is that, for example, one of the endings for the other two characters, it wasn't. It was also a little bit open ended, but in the part where they just walk away. For me, just having closure for both of them, even though they ended up with a lot of loss, which is really where the one of the main themes of the story is loss, which is where the term mouthful assault comes from. They have literally lost everything that they have, including their children. But in the end, they get closure. And for me, closure even is a good ending, I think, for me. So I think it's also, the way we look at these things and what really counts as happy or not.
Okay, thank you. I know when you were talking, Lola, you touched briefly on, I think that's the person's story I found most intriguing. I'm going to come to you, Tosin. Uh, Niamakim.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So her own story is particularly painful because her rejection is both personal and systematic.
Yeah.
And I was trying to compare her to was it like Sulafa, you know? So she
Hmm.
was the mother also pushed to the brink. But while Sulafa's story, I mean, Sulafa's pain is swallowed by the community's expectations. You know, I
Hmm.
think they said she didn't have enough male, she didn't bear enough male children or something. In Nema Kim's one, it's almost like she has to fight. She's fighting a society that won't listen. Like, how do people just make assumptions, judge you just based on how you look? And I think it's when I listened to it in the book again this morning, I realized that Hassan had died. And
Yeah.
nobody told her anything.
Yep.
And I think why that resonated with me was because I had a schoolmate who I was told had lost her husband.
Mm.
And this was a second husband. So I remember reaching out to her, how are you doing? Hope everything is okay. How are you? Just checking in on her. And that's why I found out that she got married, so had a son from the first marriage, lost that husband, married this second husband who was raising this son as his. Then he went to Nigeria on holidays, passed away there, and was buried. And no one, and all they just said to her was, "Oh, he has died."
Oh.
Like, who does that? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's why, when I read her own story, and this morning I was like, oh, Hassan died. Oh, wow. Wow. And then her son too. So please talk to us about Nyamakin because
Yeah.
I need some sort of clarity.
Okay.
Yeah, because just a lot was going on, but her story is the one I think that resonated with me.
Yeah. So, be careful of any spoilers here, but generally,
No,
the
it's
idea
fine.
was that she was completely rejected by this person's family
Mm-hmm.
and where she's from. And this is extremely common in that you're from this tribe or you're from this area. We don't marry from you guys, and that is it. It's not even the person's decision to make.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it differs what kind of family you belong to. Is then more sophisticated or more educated people might not be that harsh.
Mm-hmm.
But we're talking about a very small village with very strong opinions of themselves and of their own ethnicity, etc. So this was also in a time period where this just did not happen. And I'm also wondering what made him make that decision. But this is also something that used to happen. I think it still happens in Sudan, where especially because people who travel a lot, wherever they go, they need to have a wife somewhere, so they marry, but then they usually leave them there. That's what I understand. Men, especially early on in the 40s and 50s and 60s, where it was quite common for men to travel as part of government, different movements, etc. So they'd marry from that area, and then when they leave, they just divorce and leave them whoever they are and with their children and move on to a different place. A lot of that was quite a common practice for a specific, sector of people there. Um, and so that's what would be expected from this guy, and that he went to the South and he lived there and he got married, but then he shouldn't be bringing his wife back with him. And so she was just completely rejected by these people, and that you have to divorce her, and we don't recognize this marriage or the son or anything. And then when you think about what was in stake in terms of inheritance, because this was a very rich family, and once you have another wife and another child, it means the money goes in different directions. I want that. And so it was a point in that he did pass away, and that she wasn't told because no one wanted anything to do with her or her child. And she wasn't even invited to be part of that loss or anything. And it was also his own mistake, honestly, not for dying, but for going ahead and getting married behind her back and then moving on with his whole new life without her, keeping her in the dark, without a not making enough, putting things in place for if anything happens to him or anything like that. So it was kind of a shared responsibility there.
Yeah, because I believe in I believe in closure. If you don't want somebody, make it clear to the person. But I think life has taught me that sometimes you have to create your closure for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when she went there, the way she was spoken to, and I was wondering, but he died. The least you could say to her is, yes, we don't want you, but let him know, oh, he passed away.
Yeah.
She was treated. Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they're also dealing with her as if, assuming that all she wants is part of the money. It's not just about, like she was some kind of gold digger. That was also part of it. And that's why, don't come here claiming that we owe you anything. This was, you're not part of any of this, not part of the relationship, not part of the family, and definitely not part of the inheritance.
Yeah, but I think her father was a chief or something.
In the South, yeah, in the South. That's also part of our, the idea of dealing with this other. I mean, this other person in this case, North versus South. Um, no one cares what's going on there. We have this saying in Sudan, which is where the minute you leave your home, you lose your value. Because when you're in an area or a country that doesn't really understand where you come from, no one really appreciates what you are. You're just another immigrant or another black person or anything. No one cares if you come from what kind of family you come from, if you're royalty, where you come from there. You have no value because no one understands or wants to know what you're like. So it's the same thing there. So, for them, it doesn't matter if her father is a chief. What does that even mean to them? Nothing at all. She's just another worthless, person.
Hmm. Yeah, because she wasn't from a poor family. Laide, your hand was up. So Laide, then Tosin, and then Lola.
My hand been up.
Yes. Yeah,
No.
when we
So,
called your name, you were busy. Yeah. So
sorry about that.
okay.
Sorry, Brenda. So, I'm just lowering this. Oh boy, bimbo. Anyway, so my Instagram
Laide,
post
stay
this
in one place.
morning.
We can't see you. You're all over the
Okay,
place.
hi. So for me, the story. Hi, Reem. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your book, and thanks for having two characters named after me.
Oh, really?
Yes.
She's Fatima also.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
yeah, while I don't usually enjoy trauma, and for so many reasons, I was able to relate to the book because of my Islamic culture and all of that. So two things I wanted to add. The first thing is how you mentioned it earlier about it's always we refer to everybody else as the other.
Mm-hmm.
So I've experienced that from moving to I moved to Ottawa. I had two young children. I wanted to give them an Islamic upbringing, and then I joined a mosque in the Ottawa area. But the Arabs always think they're the most Islamic of all, and I could just see the racism. So that's what made me one of my major determinants,
Yeah.
reasons that made me leave the mosque.
Yeah.
But that's not so I was able to relate to that in that aspect. But this book, for me, what I took away from it was pain, our addiction to pain and trauma. So earlier you talked about the River Nile in all of its glory, and yet all of the lives that it has consumed. And yet we keep returning back to it, right? And similarly, with all the characters in the book, almost all of them, the patriarchal community and the women who are also the biggest enablers of patriarchy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And the cyclical, I forget the word I'm looking for, but the cyclical, missions of everybody just doing the same thing over again, even though we don't like it. You could see things repeating itself in different generations. So I just wanted you to two things I would like for you to like. There are no spoilers here. I think all of us have read the book. So, and because everybody reads from different beginnings and different perspectives, I wanted to hear you tell us the story from, just basic summary coming from you, right? That's one. And then I wanted to hear more about pain and trauma, as the book is about, and the cyclical effects of it, and how we continue to enable it. Because why, for instance, are people still swimming in the river now, right? And many people mentioned earlier, why did Fatima not choose another route, even though it was available to her? So, like, we know pain is familiar, trauma is familiar, and people continue to subconsciously seek it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and I know you're a physician as well, so I wanted to hear about more about that from you. Or is it just me that thinks that took away from the book that the pain is just pain and trauma is addictive.
Yeah, thank you for that. First of all, I totally relate to the whole racism from other Arabs thing. This is something that I face. I don't go to the mosque a lot. This is
Mhm.
maybe, I mean, not one of the reasons, but it is there. It's something that you're exposed to. But even when I take my kids to school, like with the other parents, when you say hi, the white Arabs would just look down at you. They wouldn't even reply. And then, as opposed to people who look more like me, like even if they're not Muslim or anything or Arabic, on any in any given situation, I would be more comfortable, and I would be more welcomed dealing with a black person rather than an Arab or a Muslim who is light colored. And that's just something a fact of life. I've lived in different countries, particularly in the Middle East and the Gulf, and that's always been the case. So I completely relate to that. And I'm technically someone who speaks Arabic, so there should be some connection, but no, it's always about the color and about where you come from. You're just some other black person. So I relate to that. And I know of people whose experiences were so traumatic, they ended up not just leaving the mosque, but even, the entire faith because of that, because of some people's idiot ideas of supremacy. In terms of being addicted to pain and coming back to it, I think the problem is that it's this thing that you love doing or this thing that you are intricately connected with that causes this. It's not that you're pursuing the pain itself, but I mean, when you live by the Nile, it really is your whole life. You can't really do without it for any reason, and it's part of your daily living situation. It's like an occupational hazard, where something that just your occupation of being somewhere or doing something or living in this particular place. This is what it comes with. So there's kind of a little, not much, not really much that you can do about it. And for example, when you talk about choice isn't always an option, particularly in societies, particularly when you're a woman, particularly when you're a woman of a younger age. You don't really have that option of doing that. So it also depends on the context that you're in. Um, and so consciously or unconsciously, sometimes it's just not avoidable. It just comes with the territory that you're in. And it's not really always, possible to do that. Having said that, there are sometimes things where you love doing, but are associated with some kind of danger or some kind of pain, and you end up doing them anyway, just because the experience of having this thing or doing this thing is kind of deemed worth it. So that's also something where maybe you're not really pursuing the pain, but you just can't really help yourself.
Thank you, Reem. Tosin, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Louisa. My question for you, Reem, is along the lines of if there has been what, if any, significant evolutions have there been in Sudan in terms of these prejudices along the lines of race, class, gender that lead to such cruelty? Like, even in a small, close-knit village, as was highlighted in the book. I mean, there were things that were, I know that these are occurrences that happen all over the world every day. But just in terms of like the plight of women, for instance, was it Sarah? Um,
Sulafa?
no, Salafa's co-wife, the second wife,
Okay.
who, was
Mhm.
sliced open to extract her precious boys. The cruel
Yeah.
mother-in-law, um, the killing of Naima Kim's son,
Yeah.
just this casual cruelty. And as others and yourself have mentioned as well, the enablement that the women play into this, just the acceptance of like high maternal mortality rates and infant mortality rates, which I know that there are, systemic factors that go into that as well. And then, the relationship between the Arab folk and the natives, so to speak. I feel like when we speak about racism, there's white supremacy that often gets really highlighted, but the foundation of white supremacy is anti-Blackness. And so even if someone isn't exactly white, there's still just all this downstream prejudice that happens because anti-Blackness is global and is really to the other side of the coin of white supremacy. So has there been any since that time period, which was around like the 80s, 90s, has there been any significant cultural shifts in terms of I guess maybe the strides that feminism have made in the region and a more kind of talked about um, narrative about like the relationships between Arabs and more darker skinned folk because I feel like that's not highlighted enough, just even in the global psyche, like how long the Arab slave trade went on for and how cruel and brutal that was as well, of which we still see the vestiges um,
Yeah.
come up in the novel, even like centuries after and stuff.
Yeah. The short answer is no. There have been no changes or very little changes. And this is what was one thing about this novel was that it could have been set in any time period. It could have been today in Khartoum, or it could have been in the 80s or the 60s or the 30s. It's that little change that has happened. The one thing that I would mention is that on a daily basis, like everyday life in your average neighborhood, people live very peacefully alongside each other. People of different ethnicities. No one really cares. I mean, and this is more in rural areas. People are perfectly fine doing all of this and their neighbors, and they do everything together. And they invite each other to their occasions, etc. They work alongside each other where in those places that hire everyone, which are not all places, to be honest. So on a daily basis, it's not an issue, and um, it becomes an issue when you come to things like, particularly when it comes to things like marriage. This is a place, this is an area where, and even alongside, you know, within the same community, very strong lines are drawn about who it's okay to marry, and so this is where ethnicity comes in quite strongly. In that, yes, we're friends and we're neighbors and we eat with each other and everything, but we don't marry each other. Full stop. That's one of the main things. The problem comes when this divide is weaponized, as has happened, particularly after 1989, after this Islamist Brotherhood. It was something quite easy to play along because they were already, the divide was already there, even if it wasn't as vicious before, way back before then. It wasn't fully weaponized by governments or by areas, and that's why what damage was there was kind of localized. But once it became something that people were wielding as a weapon, that's when it got really, really, really bad, and that also enabled these people. So I mean, in any common society, you have a minority who are already prone to violence, and they're happy to do that. Even when you talk about white versus black, if you talk about the general white society, those people who might actually, take a gun and whatever, all of that, they are not a majority. The majority might just stand on the side, which also makes them, part of the problem. But generally, it's not the main tool that people use. But when it is systematic, that's the problem when it gets into the system. And it gets more when it's weaponized. So this gives the power to these people, this minority, to do all these things. And so that's when it becomes a problem. People deal with it on a day-to-day basis, at least in my country, and they're fine with it. But when it comes to these two specific areas, that's when it becomes a problem. And when it's weaponized and enabled, that's when it becomes a huge problem. And then when you have these openings, like the war that's going on in Sudan now, is not a civil war. It's not between two people. It's between two idiots with guns who are trying to and who are also enabled by regional players to take over. It's a power grab basically. But then in that chaos, that's where the ethnic divide has come in. So especially in areas like Darfur and Kordofan in the West, the killing there has been specifically along ethnic lines because people are making use of this chaos to bring up their own things. So these very Western Arabic tribes and these different tribes alongside against these ethnic African tribes, because there are already grievances there which have gone back for decades around land governance and herding, etc., and all sorts of stuff. You can't really point to one thing. People like to simplify African conflicts by saying, "Oh, it's just this is the reason," and it's never that simple. There's always so much going on there. But then when these circumstances come along, the ethnic divide really plays a huge and a very disastrous role in this.
Thank you. I want to quickly ask a question, then Lola, and then Ayomiku. So we've been talking about the women. I want to look at the men in the book. Because the men, like, I look at Hassan, I look at the village elders. I also look at K. Al-Sid. So the men often act, like the way you've written it, the men often act through absence, silence, or tradition. Like that one who beat his wife and all of that. Because I know sometimes, I think sometimes you find yourself in cultures where we call it domestic violence. They'll say, oh, it's too much education, you call it domestic violence. But a man is correct. It's okay for a man to correct his wife. As long as he doesn't beat her too often. If you've read the book Things Fall Apart, where Okonkwo was always beating his wife, he wasn't cautioned by the elders for beating her. He was cautioned for beating her too much.
Yeah.
But beating her was just okay. So the men in this book often act through absence, silence, or tradition, right? And then I'm looking at Ke Al-Sid as a child of two worlds who carries promise, then he carries burden, that burden. So his character, what does his character represent in the context of identity, belonging, inheritance? And then the men, how did you approach writing the male characters in this story that is so centered on women's pain and resilience? So did you inject the men in there as this is the what's it called? This is the catalyst for your pain?
This quite goes alongside something that you said earlier about women enabling all of this to happen. I think women in our societies are the biggest champion for crimes against women themselves. They're the ones who insist on harmful traditions. They're the ones who insist on putting men in this light where no one should question them and they're allowed to do this. Very often, even like today when a woman is sexually harassed or something, the first people to complain would be women and say, oh, but what was she wearing? Why was she even there? And all that nonsense. And that people protect the man's right to do all this nonsense at all costs against women. There's always that ridiculous enabling thing. And I kind of wonder sometimes if these women didn't do that, would men even would they do that? I mean, they might, just not to this extent. It's just because they're enabled so much. A lot of these traditions are enforced by women who are also the victims. Even when you're an older woman, you're a matriarch who've already gone through this before. Why would you want to do that to your children, to your fellow women again, or to your own daughters and your granddaughters? So really, you can't really take it out of that. But yes, that's kind of how it acts, acting through absence, acting through, their own rights. About hitting, for example, hitting, I find is quite, there's Lala or Fatima mentions that there's a verse in the Quran that says men are allowed to beat women. And there are a lot of rereadings of this verse and several other verses, because a lot of things have been explained or kind of translated by men all this time. We're having this new wave of feminist understandings and readings of the Quran in different languages, and more kind of delving into the actual language. And I find this very much more believable, in that it doesn't mean that at all, that particular verse. But because it's so popular among people who would like to encourage this behavior, like, oh yes, we're allowed to do this by law or by Islamic teachings. And actually, this particular teaching, when it did come out, it was specifically mentioned in one context, and that people who enforce this, even if you have some kind of right to do this, it doesn't mean that you should, or it means that you're a good person when you do that, if that makes any sense. So there's a lot of again, using specific, rights or presumed rights, perceived rights to this, where and then that's how you're defended or your right to this. Like when you mentioned, if a society allows beating, just not beating too much, people will go ahead and beat their wives. I mean, we're allowed to do that by society. Our rights to do this, our right to do this is protected by whatever teaching there is. So that's why they're going to do it. Um, but that doesn't mean that you should, or doesn't mean you're a good person or whatever when you do that. And for example, in our society, in Sunni societies, it also falls within cultures, just like marrying more than one wife falls within specific cultures. Not all people do that. Not all tribes or cultures. It's more of a cultural thing rather than a general, for example, Sudanese or Islamic or whatever thing. Culture and tradition weighs heavily into these things. Just like hitting women. That's not at all a common practice. It is a common practice in some areas, but overall, specifically with more educated societies, it's not at all a common practice. So this is where things get quite confused, and in that confusion, people are able to do what they want with this confusion, and they're enabled by other people that protect their rights.
Mm. When I think of it in Christianity, when your husband beats you and the Christian mothers come to make peace, they advise you guys not to let the devil come in between you people. So it's never a thing of your as a man, you don't lay your hands on another adult. It's the fault of the devil. Don't
Yeah.
let him come in between this marriage because a good woman builds her home.
Yeah, it falls on the woman again. Like, what did you do to make your husband?
Yes, what did you do? Oh, he
Yeah,
slapped you, you talk too much. And there used to be this saying then that when you are quarreling with your husband, put water in your mouth
so that you don't talk back.
so you don't talk back. That's, because when you don't talk back, you won't get hit. And I'm wondering,
Yeah. It's always that. Like even when we talk about divorce in our societies, oh, the woman didn't, she wasn't working hard enough to hold on. And you would be talking about a husband who is abusive or who drinks or who doesn't, provide for the family and who does all sorts of nonsense. But when the marriage does fall apart, it's always the woman's fault. Oh, she didn't know. And this is something that members of my own family say. And I'm like, what is wrong with you people? Why are you taking all responsibility away from a fully grown adult, but also giving this person all the rights in this relationship or in this society, and that they're the ones who should make the decisions and they're the ones who should do whatever, but they're not responsible for any of their incompetencies or whatever idiocy is going on in their heads.
yeah. Okay, thank you. So Lola, Ayomiku, then Lady. Lola, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. So, thank you for bringing the men up. I find that all of the men are just cowards,
Yeah.
especially Hassan. Like, I mean, he talked a good talk in the beginning, but his greed, oh shit. Money is a terrible thing. He loved money so much he just had to go back home and then marry and not even tell her. Oh my God, I found that to be the most horrible. But again, it was just again, maybe just in t that time and maybe it's still happening. I think you said it still is, but just for me, I think that was one of the most heartbreaking was how terrible can you be, especially knowing that this woman left everything she had. She wasn't poor, she could have lived a good life, but she left everything. You convinced her to leave everything to come with you, and then you would do that to her. That got to me.
And
That
her,
really did,
It's
you
the
know.
devil. It's the devil. It's the devil. It's
it
not
was the devil. It was the devil.
it's the devil. It's the devil.
One thing that brought up to me was that when you're away, like when you're alone, especially when you experience, for example, leaving your family and your country and going to a new country, there are so many things that you are able to do, and you're in a different context where you allow yourselves to do things or to pursue things that you really want, for example. And then when you're back home, it's a completely different story. You're when you're back in that familiar place, the pressures are quite a bit different. You know, for example, when Muslim girls leave whatever country they're in and they go and live somewhere in a Western country, then they end up, taking off their hijab, for example, either because the pressure is too much to keep it on because you're always harassed and in the street, etc., or because you never really wanted to put it on in the first place, and now you're finally free to do that. But when you're back home, it's not the same thing. even if no one really, talks to you, you're still in a completely different context where it might even be more comfortable for you to put that hijab back on, for example. And the same thing for this person. So he's been away for years and years, away from his country. He's already been, become very familiar with this different culture and these different people, and he finds this beautiful girl and he marries her, etc. But once he's back home, first of all, everyone is against this marriage, so he's not even able to have his family in his own hometown. And then second, once he's away from them for this long period of time, but he's with his original family. And I personally, I mean, I've been married for years now and I have children. I have the second family, but it's kind of always my my original family that I think of, that I'm more comfortable with. My parents and my siblings, or that place where you grew up with. So when you're back in this area of familiarity and all these things which you used to love as a child and all these people, and your parents are really pressuring you into this and you want to just make everyone happy, etc., it's much easier for you to kind of do that step, which is made easier for you. You know, just marry your cousin or whoever she was, this person, and look, and everyone's happy for you, and you're having a proper wedding and proper everything, and you're able to build your home and have your family now, and everyone is happy, and just forget about that other mistake that you made. All of those incentives and that pressure make that decision doable. In the end, sometimes you just don't want to keep on fighting at some point. But then what do you do with your first family? That's the problem there. Like, even if you choose to have a second family, it's not like you can dump that first family and just forget about them.
Thank you.
For that perspective, which it makes sense when you're in your familiar surroundings. Sorry about that, Louisa. But yeah, I think that he could have done better. And then, obviously marrying this other person. And I think, again, this is where, as women, we fall short. This Haja Yegi or something, she knew that there was this other person. You didn't have to be so mean and, mean enough to kill the son, and for me it was, I mean, you see those kinds, you hear those kinds of stories, but then you just don't, the empowerment of women, I think, still needs to just, we need more work to be done on that. I think women empowering women, I think that needs to still be something we continue to work on.
Yeah, yeah. And I do agree. Like, part of it is cowardice. I'm not justifying anyone's like actions here. But I mean, for example, someone more brave in that situation would tell his first family that, I got married and I have a second family there, and but I have this family as well. So you would be honest about that and you would keep up, your side of the deal for both, commitments. But then that person chose not to do that out of cowardice, out of whatever it was, and then eventually, that's what happened.
Thank you. Ayomiko, I saw your hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Reem. Thank you for your book. I think most of my concerns have been addressed. But one other thing I was thinking of was Sarah a disaster waiting to happen? Like, was she going to turn out to be another Zulafa? Because all the while she was trying to have her babies, her mother-in-law was just so particular about the babies. She was dying, and then the woman was just spewing like a lot of horrible, horrible. At that point, I couldn't have it anymore. A part of me wanted her to just die because I wasn't having it. And then, she now ended up having the babies, and all the mother-in-law was thinking about was, oh, are they boys or are they girls? Or what's the sex? And then, oh, they are boys. And I don't know what ended up happening to the other one. Did one survive? Did one not survive? And a part of me just felt broken for her because she was just left like that. And I felt like, oh, was she going to be another Salafa waiting to happen? Was if something went wrong with either of the babies, after they married off her girls, what was going to happen to her? Were they going to discard her the same way? And it was just, I think that part was a bit much for me. And then another part, I think I felt relieved when Sulafa went with Yamakim, because she knew that there was nothing left for her there. But I was just concerned again, like, okay, where were they going? Because both of them had nothing left. Like, what world were they going to go into? It's not like where Yamakim was coming from was a good one, good experience for her over there. Likewise, where they were at the moment. So I think it was that part. It was a lot for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. In terms of where they go, wherever they go, honestly, it would just be better from where they're coming from. Just the fact that they were able to, they've lost everything and they have shut this door on this awful village and all these horrible people, and they are just moving on. It doesn't matter where they go. They're out of here. So, I mean, for me, wherever they ended up going, it would definitely be better for them than here. Um, and that really symbolizes just ending things, cutting your losses and just getting out of the situation wherever that takes you. And it's also a bit open-ended, but just they're having that closure, in that they've lost all of this, but they're just leaving out of this place. In terms of Sarah, people are always happy to point out successful examples of good girls or good wives. The girls are the wives who listen and they're quiet and they keep their mouths shut and they always look nice. They take care of things. They take care of the house. They take care of the in-laws. They take care of the husband and the children. They provide whatever it is. In this case, having lots of children, especially males. So, of course, this is much easier when you have a younger person, for maybe a less advantaged background, for example, to just be completely submissive. And in this case, this would be, the good wife or the good girl. And you're only good when you're that. Once you start talking out or once you fail to deliver something, then you're considered something else. Um, and so that was really the issue with Sarah. And for Sarah, it was just about her, delivering what she was brought into that family to do, really. She's there to be a good wife to this person and to produce children, lots and lots of children, um, sons, of course, but also even if they're daughters. And her role became even more important in that family because she's supposed to outshine or supposed to, move this first failure of a wife out of there. But really, no one really cared about her in particular. Like in the end, that's really what showed in that her mother-in-law didn't care what she was or even if she lives or dies. It's just important that she delivers these sons, healthy sons or unhealthy sons, um, and and um, and that they're of course because in Sudan is a patriarchal inheritance, so they would inherit the name and they would inherit the business, etc. So that's why girls don't really work in these kind of societies. So that was really it. But in the end, she's just a victim just as much as everyone else. I mean, it was never about her. It was just about what role she was brought there to fulfill, regardless of what happens to her when she does this.
Thank you very much, Reem. Lide, is your hand up? No, I think she's driving. So my question, I wanted to.
Sorry, Louisa, sorry, quick question. Did both babies survive?
I think so.
You think so?
Were they boys?
They were both boys. This is my medical. I had to rewrite this scene several times because my medical kept on, and I didn't want to over medicalize it. I did not want any more gore than was necessary. I didn't want it to be like a sensational thing, which people sometimes throw in their stories to rile people up. It was all about it was about two things. It was about what was happening with the characters and what this birth meant to them, to Sulafa and to the mother-in-law or the family, and about women who are circumcised giving birth, because that's really how childbirth is in many areas in Sudan. It is incredibly traumatic. Women die all the time for this and for other reasons, or they end up with like a fistula or something like that. It's an incredibly traumatic process for a lot of people, and it's again it's something happening like at this day and age. I remember the first time when I was in medical school, the first delivery I attended, I fainted because I could not imagine the midwife was just cutting in all directions. And this is what they do in these societies because of the type of female genital cutting that's been inflicted on these women. And you can't really talk about childbirth in Sudan without, talking about that. But again, I tried to tone it down because I didn't want it to be, distract from the actual story. Um, and so she delivers these two children. The first one has a little less oxygen because he was trapped for a while. He will survive. He might not be, 100% healthy, but that just means that he's still a male. And so she's delivered her part of the deal. She's brought in the male, and she's brought in two boys, not just one. So that makes it like an extra victory for them.
I find it interesting how people conveniently forget that it's what a man puts in you that you produce. It's always seen as, oh, this is my end of the deal as a man. I've done my part. It's your duty to do X, Y, Z. And when I was reading that part where you wrote about slapping the thighs and so on, it reminded me of how traditional. When my sister gave birth here, I went to hug the nurses because they were so nice.
Yeah.
That was very foreign to me. They were so nice. They were saying to her not to shout or not to put in too much, and they were just telling her, reserve your energy. In Nigeria, you don't, they start by, hey, shut
Yeah.
up there. Slap, 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 because they
Yeah.
go there,
Lots of slapping.
want to kill the child, and then from there it goes up to vulgarity, and then
Exactly.
yes, it's very vulgar. When you were enjoying yourself, you didn't remember you are distant. Yeah, and then the husband comes. At least congratulations. Hey, you will give us something for all the work we did.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's exactly what happens.
And then you have to give the nurses money for doing their job and for being mean to your wife.
Yeah, and insulting, and it's like the vulgarity. Exactly. I mean, it's like, I mean, this is a married woman who is doing an honest job. What is the cause of all that language? And the hitting and the pinching and the slapping. It's like such a horrible experience. And then you have alongside that, I mean, giving birth in itself is it's such a difficult experience. I gave birth twice, and these were the only times in my life where I was 100% sure that I was going to die, even though I had an epidural both times. It was incredibly painful, but once the epidural kicks in, it's fine. But just that stress. I mean, both times I was telling my husband, if I die, take care of my kids. The whole process of giving birth is so difficult mentally and then physically, and then the process itself, and then everything that comes after that for ages, like the pain and the breastfeeding, etc. In itself was such a difficult. But to have to do all of this after suffering, after being circumcised as a child, and in Sudan, a lot of areas have the pharaonic type, which is a nightmare. It's just a complete obliteration of everything, and then you have this tiny little hole there. Sorry for the visual thing, but it is such a difficult thing, and then the healing and everything. It's just such a nightmare. I don't know how women do that, and they have to do it. Obviously, they have to keep giving birth. And that's why a lot of them die either during or after it. So it's just such a traumatic experience for them. Um, and I think, in our cultures, it's something that we're kind of exposed to. I mean, we kind of know about in a way, even though, thankfully it is, I'd like to say it's dying out. I don't think it is, at least not in Sudan, unfortunately. But at least people are talking about it now. And it's technically outlawed, but still people still do it, of course.
But it's still this thing of, I remember back in the day when I worked in reproductive health, we had this Professor Ahmed Ragab. I think Ragab or Ragad, but he was very popular in Egypt, in reproductive health in Egypt. And he used to come and give us sessions in Nigeria. And he said at that time that women used to brag then that my hole is as small as a pin.
Yeah.
Yes, bragging rights to tell you that my hole is as small as a pin. But
Yeah.
I see Laide's hand and Tosin, but I want to ask this question. So what does it, when I look at all these women from Fatima, Nyamakim, Sulafa, and all the other ladies in the book, so what does it cost to be a woman in a society governed by silence, shame, and superstition? How do you protect yourself and your children? Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not a sole effort. That is very important. Like, you could be someone who stands against all of these things, but if you're on your own, it just doesn't, there's so little that you can do. You can do things as long as they're very low key. And I think one thing that is something that everyone should be doing is education. Because really, when you look at what makes these societies different in terms of who, like, for example, just talking about my own family, I come from a family of educated people on both sides, and I'm very, very lucky to have that, in that my grandparents are educated. In our societies, that isn't very common. And my families aren't related. Like, these are two different tribes, different countries, I mean, different areas, etc. So I'm very lucky to come from that. And so I didn't suffer any of this nonsense. And my mother didn't definitely suffer any of that. But that was just, honestly, it's just the luck of being born into these families. Members of my same family who are not so lucky in that have gone through all of this. Education is a key, I don't like to use the word weapon, I'd say tool. It is a key tool of getting people out of misery.
Mm.
for so many different reasons. You know, when you have education, for example, you're more likely to be able to marry from outside, and I'm talking at a very primitive level here. For example, marrying from another educated family, and so giving your children a better choice. Whereas if you don't have that, you'd end up, you know, being stuck in the same cycle in the same area for all this time. It gives you the opportunity to leave the situation. And this is something that girls I really wish they would understand, in that you need this education to be independent in any kind of situation. It doesn't mean going against your family and forgetting your values. That's how people like to frame it, in that, oh, you're educated now, so you're too good for this, or you want to leave your cultures and your traditions and do all these bad things. That's not the way it is. It's about keeping yourself safe, getting out of unsafe situations, being able to, if you don't have someone to provide for you or to stick up for you, you can do that for yourself. So education is very key in all of this. You can change the trajectory of your life and your children's life through that. It's I think the most important thing you have, because otherwise you're at the mercy really of all these other, you know, elements of this context that you're in. If even if your immediate family is supportive, you still have your extended family, and then, as I mentioned, the community, etc. Whereas education really does kind of give you a push in another direction.
Well, in Nigeria, we say some people go through school, but school doesn't go through them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have a
Nana, welcome.
similar.
For those who don't know, Nana Ekwa Hammond is the editor of Relations, where I first came across Reem's work. Um, Nana, are you there?
I just went for a run, so I'm looking really crazy. That's why I'm off camera. I'm so glad I caught. I was like, oh, I'm so late, but thank you for. I'm glad I caught the end of it. But congratulations, Reem. I love this book.
Thank you, Nana. It's great to see you.
Good to see you too.
Okay, so we go. I think Tosin, you're next. I see your hand up.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to speak a little bit to the question that you just raised about how women, like, how do you thrive? How do you cope in such a society, protecting yourself and your children? And I think we have to circle back once again to enablement. I find that like when these things are just so entrenched, generation after generation after generation, centuries, a lot of women look out for their soul survival. And I think Salafa's story really illustrates that, with how her stepmom strategically swoops in shortly after her mother's death. Um, I'm hoping that there was enough wealth that could have been, you know, spread to have taken care of all the children, but you see how she kind of ostracized the children of the widow of sorry of the deceased first wife, and you know get quickly gets them out of the house so that she can establish herself with her children. And then you have a character like Salafa, who grows up in such neglect and abandonment and betrayal by her father. Here's where the women, so here's where the cowardice of the men, you know, factors in again, because these are your children as well, and this is going on in the home, and you're nowhere to be found to address this. And so her ending up, sold off to a family without a care for, or without, the factoring of her happiness or whatever. And she ends up in such a situation. Like it just almost seems like it was inevitable for such a character like that, and to have no way to stand up to it, fight against it, can't even return home. Um, I find that it, when it comes to surviving the patriarchy, it really isn't just about fighting the patriarchy. Like, women have to stick together. You have to love women. Like, it's not just about, oh, let's be equal with the men or whatever. You have to have a deep rooted fundamental love for women, for all of us to rise together. Otherwise, there's all this like betrayal, class betrayal, gender betrayals, and stuff that happens that just allows these systemic issues to continue to perpetuate over and over and over again. I think the struggles of women, it's been such a forever issue, and the things that we see that happened centuries ago, there's a snapshot of them in this timeline that is still just very much ongoing. I also just wanted to speak to a previous point that Reem had talked about in terms of the other, and how with Naima Hakeem, her uncle actually really called it out accurately when he was advising her to not run off with this northerner, and letting her know that your value, you will not be seen, you will not be handled, valued for the precious person that you are. And we see how that, plays out tragically for her. I mean, granted, she was young and naive, and once you have a child, and she ended up kind of being stuck. And so that was a little bit tragic as well. And then I just wanted to ask a question of Reem. I'm not sure if I misheard about the circumcision issue. So is it something that occurs like during childbirth, or women are typically circumcised before that, or it's something that happens like the midwives do during the process for, what reason? I'm not sure.
Well, first, just the first point about Sulafa's childhood and her experience with her stepmother. That's really a classic example of how women have the role that men play in these really bad outcomes for their daughters with that distancing. A lot of people, especially the more important you are or the bigger the family, men really don't deal with children, especially the girls. They might deal with the boys, of course, because they need to train them to take over or whatever it is. But for the girls are always the woman's responsibility, the wife or the stepmother or whatever it is. And that's really just none of their, and I've seen this in real life where you have men who are very successful, very educated, very well established, and they're like diplomats or professors or whatever, and their daughters haven't even finished high school because they just leave all of that responsibility to the mother, and the mother herself is not educated, or she had different priorities, or more likely the mother-in-law, which is his mother, decides that no, marry them off early, and that's all that. So, I mean, as a present father, that would never happen on it, and it wouldn't happen if the mother was educated and also enabled herself. In Sudan and in lots of our societies, the mother-in-law really has all the power in the relationship, so she can decide everyone else's fate. So yeah, in terms of the FGM, the female genital mutilation issue, this is something that girls undergo in their earlier years, like around, could be starting from age 5, 6, all the way up to their preteens. It depends on what kind of, it's an event where it's technically outlawed in Sudan, so they can't really celebrate it as much. But usually it's an event for celebration and that a cleansing thing. They believe that when you do this, a girl becomes pure. She won't stray into do whatever bad habits or whatever, and she's also clean. There wouldn't be any infections or smells or whatever. It's a very interesting way of looking at it. And there are different levels. There is a level where you just cut a little bit of something off and that's it. No stitching, nothing. A little bit of bleeding. That's the lighter part. And then there's the very, very advanced part of really cutting everything out and just leaving flat skin. And I remember one of these universities used to give a tutorial where they say that, and it's usually done by midwives for the children. And then you just put a straw inside and suture everything around that straw. So really it's just that straw sized opening that's left. And you can just imagine the trauma that happens then, and then the trauma that comes later on. And so whenever they have to give birth to a child, the midwife literally has to cut open a path for that to happen if it doesn't rip on its own. Sometimes I've seen a delivery where that happened actually, 2 deliveries actually, where it just ripped open.
I mean, intercourse would be an ordeal as well.
Oh yeah, that sometimes requires cutting as well. And then also after the woman gives birth, I'm sorry about the details, but anyway, after the woman's good, there's also a second role for the midwife to re-close everything and to make sure that everything is nice and tight. Sorry about the language. And that's also that's something that the women themselves ask for, because obviously you can imagine the mess that results from all of this, and that everything needs to be re-sutured and tightened up a bit there. So, and this is something really that women insist on doing. They insist on doing it to their children. I know, it's especially mothers-in-law. I remember there was this doctor in our in our group when I used to work in Sudan. He said when he had his daughters, he literally threatened the women in his family, his mother and his mother-in-law and his wife, that if you ever even think of doing something to these girls, I'm putting you all in jail. That's what it took for them not to do that. Just that threat, and that, of course, they didn't want to upset him, but that was a big thing for him. So there is a role that men can play in this if they insist on it not happening. They might not be listened to, of course, especially if it's their mothers that they go against. But in general, they just don't. It's not something that they go into. It's a women's issue. They don't really. It's not something that they really talk about. So they are enabling this to happen, and at the same time, they're not doing their role in stopping it from happening when they do have that power. And it's the women who insist on doing this to keep their daughters pure and clean. And they have this whole thing where girls who are not circumcised are dirty girls, and they're probably playing around with men or whatever, these kind of ideas, and actually young girls grow up believing that. I remember there was this one of these studies that we do every year, which is a household health survey. It's for different issues. It's one of those multiple indicator. Anyway, lots of details there. So one of the questions that they ask, they go household to household, literally, for several health indicators, nutrition, etc. And then one of the things that they ask about is this issue. And so we saw that the last one was done in 2016. Obviously, after that was COVID and the war. But then the group of respondents who are saying that they are circumcised and they will continue to do this practice are the group of people who are between the ages of 19 and 40. So these are people who are like, I mean, they're becoming mothers themselves, and they're mothers now. This is something that you would expect someone over the age of 65 to say, for example, if you were looking at a trend of this going away. But no, it's alive and well. And this was like 90% or something. I was shocked when I saw that figure. 90% of respondents in this age group have experienced this, and they continue to keep on doing it, and they don't see anything wrong with it. So you can tell that whatever efforts are being made aren't really working because they're just not reaching the proper people. Or maybe these people don't have the power to stop it.
So let me blow your mind.
And this is all done sorry, Louisa, still all done in the service of patriarchy and the male gaze and this purity culture and
even if the patriarchy doesn't really care, but it makes them happy.
Yeah. That's why I said let me blow your mind. So when I worked in reproductive health, it's so interesting that you see when we did I did extensive reading on female circumcision, because in some cultures in Nigeria we have it's done. Yeah, we have that it's done. So it's described as cutting, because if you look at the part of the, I don't want to go into too many words, but you know what the female reproductive organ looks like. The part that is cut is the most sensual part.
Exactly, yeah.
So they say that it is cutting off the rose that stokes the ember of desire.
Okay.
So that when you that when you cut out that rose, it keeps you decent, it keeps you clean, it keeps you moral. You don't go around, go sleeping around. But there was this research from Egypt that came, and they realized, because they say, okay, the test for virginity in marriage and all that is from the front. They realized that a lot of girls were having anal sex.
Yeah.
Yes. They discovered that. So they were still technically virgins because the front was still intact, but it didn't stop them from going in through the back door. So my question here is, when you look at it and you think this thing called morals, who gets to define what is moral? Because fine, if you are living according to the holy book that says thou shalt not, I understand. But when you start to put in all these measures where you are cutting this, cutting that, because all these things, it's always women. And women are the greatest, I keep saying this thing, that we are our greatest problem. A lot of people say, oh, no, it's the men. But we are our greatest problem. Because in situations like this, now, okay, you're trying to stop female circumcision. I won't be surprised if you find a family where most of the time the mother-in-law, the matriarchs in the family say, if she's not circumcised, my son is not marrying her. How is that her business?
Exactly, yeah.
You're not going to be in that marriage with them. I agree that, yes, marriage is still, you marry a man, you marry the whole family. But it is really not your business. Your son is the one who is in love with this woman. And it's so sad that when people talk about marriages in our culture, I don't hear people talking about, oh, they love each other. They want to be intentional about loving each other and being fair and kind to each other. It's always about the society. Oh, is she a good wife? Can she cook? Can she clean? Like they say, Ask an African man to define a good wife, and you hear him define a maid, which is very sad, very very sad.
Yeah.
Yeah, did I see someone else's hand up? What's the time? Oh, it's almost one. Okay, did I see anybody's else's hand up? Can we take our group photo before I forget, please? Can we take our group photo? Reem, have you got your book?
I have my book.
Who has Bukola? Ah, maybe she stepped away. Okay.
Reem, I sent you a personal message.
On Zoom. Ah, okay. Yeah. I see it now.
Okay, let me see. Does everybody have their book? Hold on, let me just go to gallery view. Okay. No, Lola, you weren't looking at us. Lola, you're looking that way. Please hold up your book. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So, does anybody else have any more questions? Reem, what are you working on now?
Thank you for sharing that, Fatima. Right now I'm supposed to be working on my second book, which is actually my first book. This was the book that I was working on before A Mouthful of Salt. A Mouthful of Salt kind of got out of hand and then turned into this novel. I wasn't planning on writing A Mouthful of Salt, but for this book I've been writing for quite a while. It's about a group of characters again, and I'm trying to tone it down now because of the reaction towards the multiple characters in A Mouthful of Salt. So that's why I'm trying to rewrite a bit this one because it was also multiple characters.
Okay.
So I'm turning it back to one main narrator or one main protagonist. It's about the popular resistance to two governments: the Numeric government, the socialist government in the early 80s, and then the Islamist government in 2018, and particularly the role of women in these popular movements, the protests, the disappearances. It's a very morbid book, and it's taken me quite a while to write just because I'm so upset about everything that I read as part of the research.
Okay.
These are very difficult, things to read and write about. It was a very, particularly the Islamist regime from 1989 until 2019. That was an incredibly difficult period to read and to experience as well. So, but the main point is the women's, the women's role in this resistance, either on the streets or in the political arena. At first, it was about these several characters, but then when I started focusing more on the women, I was also inspired by the Shadow King, Marza Mengeste's, the Ethiopian women's also resistance to the Italian occupation. That was probably the one book that gave me this final push to really focus on the women in this topic.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And before I go, I wanted to. So, which character changed the most as you wrote this novel? Which of the, you know how sometimes as a writer, I've chatted with an author who says once he starts writing, the characters guide him.
Yeah.
As writers, I know sometimes I read somewhere where they say, do not love your character so much that you find it hard to kill them off. I'm guilty of that. I become very protective of a character and I say, no, I don't want anything. Then again, you miss out on the conflict. And the beauty of storytelling is conflict, the climax, and the resolution. So which of the characters changed a lot in the course of your writing? Which of these characters changed a lot?
The most character that changed was Sadiq, actually. Sadiq was this minor character at the beginning. He didn't really have a role at all. And he really was a bit of an idiot in the beginning. In the short story, he just shows up one time and then he leaves and that's it. He's dismissed by Fatima because he's just this guy that she's supposed to marry at some point. But then the more I wrote about him, I had to keep bringing him in. And really his main role in the end was to listen to Fatima because Fatima needed to talk this out, her own role in these prejudices and this racism, because she thinks she's so perfect, but then actually she's also playing a role in all of this. So she needed to talk it out with someone, and that someone had to be Sadiq. And this is also based on a conversation that I once had a long time ago with at least two other people. When you talk about it and you lay it out there, you realize that you're not innocent at all of this. You think you are, but you're not. So he did end up maturing quite a lot while I wrote towards the end of the story, and then he played that main role in that he was the one that she would bounce off her her ideas and someone who would tell her, give her a clearer idea of what really is going on, that she's not 100%, right herself. So that was the main person who changed during the story. I don't really, I'm not a planner kind of writer. I don't plan things. I have like this core idea, which makes me quite upset, and I have to write about, and then it kind of just evolves from there. So some of these characters develop a bit on their own. The story kind of tells itself in some way. After it's done, then I look at, places that need a bit more research, and sometimes the research, if it doesn't add up, it changes a bit of the course of the story. But generally, I try not to touch my characters too much. They kind of do their own thing, if that makes sense. And that's why I had trouble with Fatima in the end, because my own ideas were intruding there, and I didn't want to really impose myself on them, and that's why I ended up leaving it a bit open in the end.
Okay. And how have you found people's reception of the book? Because I mean, you won an award, so which is great.
Surprisingly well. I'm a bit surprised at how well received this book has been. It's being translated into 6 languages now.
Oh, great. Congrats. Congratulations.
And I'm really waiting for the Arabic version to come out, because that's where I think most of the trouble will come from.
Yeah, because I wanted to hear that, oh, in Sudan, this is the reception. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So far, a lot of people, Sudanese people have read it, but they read the English version, and that automatically makes them a bit more understanding. But I would be interested to see when the majority of Sudanese read Arabic. I'm interested to see how they will receive it, because the topics, that it touches, particularly the issue of the racism, and particularly the issue of South Sudan, that issue is a very sore issue for us, Sudan and South Sudan, everything that happened and all the war and all the pain. It's and we don't really talk about it at all. It's not something that we discuss. It is, again, it had so many root causes. It went back way, way before, and different things ended up happening. But in the end, what happened was that people in South Sudan were displaced, and they lost their homes, and they ended up moving to the north, mostly to the north, where they were mostly living in poverty. They weren't able to be accepted 100%. That's what eventually happened. What led to that are different issues, but that's what happened. And so people just don't really like talking about that at all, because it puts everyone, it makes everyone uncomfortable. So like even today, when we talk about these things, people get upset, in that, why are you calling us racist? We're not racist. This never happened. Whereas, I mean, it kind of did happen, consciously or unconsciously. This is what it did happen. I mean, yeah, especially at a time like this, where because of the war that's going on and everyone is experiencing this death and displacement, it makes it even more of a sore topic to when people are already going through all of this difficulty. Then you come up and say, oh, but yeah, look at all the bad things that you did, and it's just not the time for it.
I think for change to happen, people have to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. But I remember at the beginning of this meeting, you had said something like about not writing. You say you don't write romance. But as you were speaking, something just came to my mind. Do you ever see yourself in the future one day writing about this femme fatale, this Sudanese woman who is free, takes on many lovers, does whatever the hell she wants to do? Do you see yourself writing? Because I just, as you were speaking, when you spoke about the Arabic translation, that thought just came to my head. What if Reem wrote a story like this, that it was translated? What will happen? See yourself being bold, because like I tell people, when I write stuff, what I write about is very different from who I am. And someone said, how? I said, I write as my alter ego. So my alter ego has the guts to write and say what Louisa, the very demure Louisa, would not say. So do you see yourself ever getting to that level where you are bold enough, you have the audacity to write like that?
I don't know, because I don't even read this stuff. It's not because, I mean, I'm sure romance exists somewhere. I do see it. Honestly, I see it in my own parents. I can't lie that this is the family that I grew up with. My parents are they're great partners. They were long friends. They were, they went to university together, and then they literally built a life together, and they respect each other a lot. I mean, I see all of that, but I don't see it everywhere else, to be honest. You see different examples of it. Especially in conservative societies like ours, it doesn't always manifest as people, holding hands and being in love. There are those examples, but there are also other examples where you see it a very kind of calm and deep, sort of. So you wouldn't really call it romance per se. You call it love, for example. Those are things that I can deal with. But even because even when I read romance,
Mhm.
It just annoys me. I mean,
Erotica. I'm not talking of erotica. Like I don't, or erotica is not my thing, but like romance.
yeah,
Sometimes
no, no, no. I'm talking about just romance and love stories and, loss and people coming back together. Maybe it's because it always has kind of a happy ending. I mean, this is the stuff that I used to read, and I'm like, this doesn't happen. I mean, it might happen to a very minority, but it doesn't happen. People will just get, fall in love and get married, and then what happens after marriage? That's a whole other nightmare of, the romance being a bit dampened. Um, it's not something that I really focus on, but I do imagine, I think I did ask myself once if this is something that I could write about. And when you do imagine all the good things that might happen with that, it would be probably something, but maybe not something that I would write for a while. I'm too busy writing about boring, morbid, miserable lives.
Anyway, think about it. Step into your alter ego and let and fly and just write about it. Well, thank you so much, Reem. It's really been amazing having you here today. You know, we're looking forward to your next work, whatever you're writing next. Keep us in mind. Once again, this is the Ottawa Black Book Club. And just thank you for, chatting with us today about your book. And thank you for giving the world, sharing this story, this story with the world. Now, at least, we've all taken a walk down the Nile, down the River Nile, just to see and just to get a glimpse of what life is like and the similarity also. Yeah, the similarities in culture. So I just want to say thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you guys for having me and for the great discussion. I really kind of like, because I've discussed this book with different, book clubs of different backgrounds.
Okay.
I always kind of, I mean, it's always different when you speak with people who are more closer to, the African, even if it's just African literature, even, let alone African countries, because as you mentioned in the beginning, there's so much in common and you're kind of starting off from a common base. The discussion is kind of a bit more, it's different and something that I really enjoy. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you more. All
Okay.
right. Have a nice Saturday.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.